let's begin with, I know that the story of the impossible found you. And it began with a late night story on the radio. I wondered if you might be able to tell us a little bit about how you found that story and what made you decide you needed to tell it.
Well, it was the third anniversary of the tsunami. And this family was Maria and her husband was invited to talk for the first time about their story. This is a story that nobody knew in Spain because they never wanted to tell about it. They never wanted to be the center of the tsunami in a story where they were so lucky. And they are still nowadays dealing with a lot of what they call the guiltiness of the survivor for the fact that they survived. So they never wanted to be the protagonist. But they told the story once, and Belen was able to hear that. And she came to me and to tell me the story just because she was very impressed about it, that she needed to tell me. No, she wasn't thinking about a film. But when she tried to tell me, there was a moment that she had to stop because she couldn't keep talking about it. She was too emotional. And I found myself 3 days after that telling to all my friends and my family the story, and I had to stop also. So I realized that there was an emotion in that story that goes beyond the context of the tsunami and talks about ourselves and talks about human conditions, human condition in a very universal way.
Sergio, I know that you worked very closely with Maria in terms of helping draw her story out of her, and I know that even in the process of working with her, you bonded over some traumatic experiences yourself that then helped her remember and tell you her story. I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, yes, we met her I think it was in April 2008, and she just, our first meeting was like 4 hours of conversation. And on that meeting, there was an immediate bond because I had just come out of a really horrible traffic accident. And to me, in the first minute, there was like something very interesting to explore, which was how do you remember something that when something that traumatic happens to you, usually it's erased from your brain, and then it comes back, and when it comes back, it's somehow transformed. It's not just a memory, but it's like a mixture of the memory and what other people told you and your dreams. So that was one of the things that helped us structure the story, and I think that was one of the first ideas that was in the treatment, to cut from the moment, the first time the wave comes, you don't see what happens, and it comes back in the end. And it's sort of, it starts out as something that looks like a memory, then it's almost a shared dream with Lucas, and then it just becomes something entirely different. It's almost like a sort of a spiritual experience. And we wanted to leave like a white canvas so that the audience could just fill in with their own experience and their details what's actually happening in there. But yeah, it was beautiful. It was just, she gave me like a richness of detail enough to make like 5 different movies. So the difficult thing was which story were we going to tell and who we were telling it for. And for me also the most difficult thing was to match the beautiful simplicity of some of the details and the lines of dialogue she gave me, like, I cannot see you like this, or things like that. It's like, there was something so truthful and honest that it was really hard to make my writing as invisible as that.
I know that a lot of the work that you did in the film, you were interacting with actual survivors of the tsunami. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how that helped shape your performance.
Yeah, it was key right from the start, speaking to people who were there. And that started for me before arriving in Thailand. While Naomi and Tom were in the tank in Alicante, I was shooting salmon fishing in the Yemen with Emily Blunt. And I had a very short window of time before finishing that film and going out into Thailand. So I met a woman in London who was a friend of mine who was there in Khao Lak, funnily enough. And her story was very similar to my character Henry's, although it ended in a more awful way. She was there with her 3 daughters and her husband, and she was split up from her husband and her eldest daughter, and was with her younger 2 daughters, managed to get them to safety, and then spent a great deal of time trying to find her husband and her eldest daughter. She found her daughter in a hospital who was quite badly injured in her legs, and she found her husband's body in a temple where they were leaving the bodies. So her story was very, had a worse ending. But she was very important to me because she talked very much about her state of mind as she was looking. And it was just purely accidental that her story was so similar to Henry's, really. But she talked about distances seeming, she'd been back to Thailand since, and she'd seen that the distances between where she left her children in safety and the hospital where she found her daughter and the temple were much shorter than she'd remembered. And she had no concept of whether things were at night or day, or how many days she looked, or the state of shock was very profound. So she was the first person who was actually there that was very useful to me. And then, of course, Henry Kike himself, who I managed to speak to him on the phone and meet him in Thailand when he visited. But Juan Antonio Bayona made a very clever decision to, in the bus station scene where we would get on the telephone, all of the immediate people round about me were real survivors of the tsunami, people who were there. And one or two of them we'd met since we'd been in Thailand. You know, we met some people that lived there, and there was a German guy sitting on my right who told us the story about he woke up and came into his living room, and his elderly parents were in his house, and his house was very close to the beach. And when the water came in, it came in so very quickly, and he was taken out of the window, but his parents weren't. And he lost both his parents. But he told us his story. His story was devastating and accurate, and he talked very clearly about the moment he was dragged into another building and was going round and round in this building and tumbling around in a sort of vortex. And he talked about there being evil in that room, and they felt very clearly that there was something very evil there. And that there came a moment where he had a decision where he could choose to live or die, and he remembers it very, very clearly, that it was very simple, that he could live or he could die. And he decided to live, and immediately was sucked out of a window of that building to safety, and then ended up on a rooftop. But the way he spoke about his passage was very key to me, because he talked about when he got up into some high ground, he was finally, because he was stuck on a roof with some people for a very long time, and they had to swim over to other buildings, and they eventually got on the land and they went up high. And he said at one point he got to a place of safety where he took himself over to the side of a building so that he could sit down and cry. And he hadn't had the luxury or the time or the opportunity to do so. And so he took himself over there, sat down, and wept and wept and wept. And then when he'd finished, he got up and then he carried on. He had to find his wife. His wife was in Phuket City, I think. So there were always people who had been there around us. We were shooting there where it happened. All of the hotels that we were all staying at were hit by the tsunami. The staff of those hotels had stories to tell us. All of our Thai crew were mainly affected by the tsunami. They had stories to tell us. So it was always present in our shooting.